Собор та Христі Володимире, вітаємо вас сьогодні на нашу цю презентацію. Кожної п'ятниці чи кожного четверга і п'ятниці ми маємо такі невеличкі представлення ж презентації щодо інформації щодо життя нашої церкви, на богословські теми, на пастирську тематику, чи взагалі дискусію і розмови про різноманітні теми, які цікавлять наших людей. Якраз COVID-19, цей вірус, що ми зараз маємо, заставив нас перейти, тому що ми не зустрічаємося особисто, заставив нас перейти до цього формату, якраз онлайн, і ми стараємося доставити якомога більше інформації для наших парафіян і віруючих, і всіх, що дивляться ці програми. So I just wanted to welcome our brother in Christ, Volodymyr Pilypchuk, current member of the Consistory of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada, as well as he is a chair of resolution committee and a legal mind for many other things that are happening in the church. And by profession, he's a lawyer. I also wanted to thank him for being here today, as we are continuing to bring to our parish members and all those who are watching some useful information about functionality of our church, history of our church, Orthodox theology, dogma, pastoral topics, and many other themes. Today, our topic would be a conversation about Sobor 2021. And I'll actually ask our brother Volodymyr to talk about it in detail. But we start, as we always start our meetings, з молитвою. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Царю Небесний, утішителю душі істини, що всюди си і все наповняєш, скарби добра і життя подателю, прийди і вселися в нас, і очисти нас від всякої скверни, і спаси благі душі наші. Слава Отцю і Сину Святому Духу, нині повсякчас, на віки вічні. Амінь. Господи, помилуй, Господи, помилуй, Господи, помилуй. Господи, благослови нас. Сам Царе, прийди, поблагослови нас, стань милосердним до нас і дай нам Твою мудрість, щоб ми були мудрими провідниками цієї церкви, і щоб працювали на славу Божу і на собі на спасіння. Слава Отцю і Сину, Святому Духу, нині повсякчас, на віки вічні. Амінь. Дякую. So, as always, request to those who are watching, please let us know which language you would prefer us to use. Today's presentation will be mainly done in English, but if somebody has a question in Ukrainian, please do not hesitate to type it, and we'll try to answer that question. Володимире, вітаємо вас.
Дякую. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Well, no, it's a great pleasure for us to have you, and thank you for agreeing to donate your time, to talk about such an important topic, Sobor, upcoming Sobor of 2015. Before you start talking about, I know that there's lots of information coming in. Before you start talking, can you just a little bit introduce yourself so people know who you are and what your current position is?
So, я називаюсь Володимир Пилипчук. I'm Volodymyr Pilypchuk. I was born in St. Catharines, Ontario, so I'm an Easterner. Lived there for about 25 years. Then lived in Ottawa from 1981 to 1989, attended the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ottawa. I think I was on the board as a secretary at one point or something. These memories fade, when you get up to over 70, you start thinking, what did I do back then? And then we moved out to 1989, we moved out to the Vancouver area and have been there ever since. I am a lawyer by profession, called to the bar in Ontario in 1978 and in British Columbia in 1991. My specialty area is administrative law. So I've dealt in the areas of labor relations. I was the vice chair of the BC Labor Board for 11 years. Workers' compensation. I was counsel to the Workers' Compensation Appeal Tribunal for about 10 years. And then after I retired from full-time practice in 2011, I did part-time work for the BC Human Rights Tribunal, both as a lawyer representing the tribunal in court and as a member hearing cases and writing decisions. I didn't do that much work for the BC Human Rights Tribunal because it was sort of a part-time job where I was giving them 2 days a week. So until I hit the wall, as they say, in 2018, and decided I'd had enough. Our granddaughter was born in January of 2019. She's just over 2 years old now. And about 3 weeks ago, we had twins that were born. So we've got 3 grandchildren. They're all in Calgary, and that's where my wife and I are currently, because we're helping with the babysitting and the chauffeuring to and from daycare and all the rest of it. So that's a little background on myself. So the parishes that in St. Catharines, it was St. George's. In London, it was Holy Trinity. And I belong to the Vancouver Cathedral, the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Vancouver. There you have it. I was never involved with the consistory of the National Church. I've always been involved in some aspect of the local church, wherever I've been, whether it's St. Catharines or Ottawa or in Vancouver. I got involved in 2008 when there was the major rewrite of the church's bylaws. And then I've been on the bylaws committee ever since. So that's, I guess, 13 years now. The bylaws committee now, during this last consistory term, has merged with the Policy and Procedures Committee and the Resolutions Committee. So it's all one committee. And we didn't see much sense in having 3 committees because a lot of the material that they dealt with was interrelated. So we felt it was best to merge them, and so that's where that committee sits. And that's the current status of it right now. So let me say a few words about Sobor, past and present. I don't know how much information I'll be able to give you about the upcoming 2021. I'll be able to give you some information, but it's still a work in progress. But let me begin. And again, I don't know how many people have been at past Sobors, but generally speaking, the Sobor runs for about 4 days plus the last Sunday, which has a divine liturgy that closes out the Sobor, and there's usually a brunch afterwards. So typically it begins on a Wednesday with registration on Wednesday and Thursday. There's a hierarchical divine liturgy Wednesday morning, and then the rest of Wednesday is taken up with the clergy and the Brodiki conference. The laity are basically free to do whatever they want. A lot of the laity don't arrive until late Wednesday, and they register Thursday morning. But there is typically a social Wednesday night where people sort of meet and greet and that sort of thing. On the Thursday, again, you begin with a hierarchical liturgy. When we had our Sobors in different hotels, then there would be a room or a hall set aside that's set up as a chapel, and the hierarchical liturgy would take place there, generally taking up during the Sobor days. It starts early. It starts at 7 a.m., usually done by 8:30. There's a breakfast, and then the sessions begin at 9:30. When it's an in-person Sobor, there's a procession. It's very solemn. Perhaps a better word in Ukrainian is urochisto. Відкривається Sobor. It's opened in a very fitting manner. There's an icon that's brought in, set up at the front. There are candles that are lit. Then there's an election of chair people, 2 clergy, 2 lay people, election of secretaries for the Sobor. There is a credentials committee that's confirmed. Scrutineers are chosen. All the typical stuff that you need to have in place in order to run a successful meeting. And that generally takes up a chunk of the morning, and that's followed then by greetings from the Metropolitan, greetings from His All Holiness, greetings from Metropolitan Antoni of the U.S., greetings from Metropolitan Soterios of who's the Exarch for Canada. All those formalities are done on the Thursday morning before lunch. And then, again, this varies from Sobor to Sobor, but typically you would have in the early afternoon on Thursday a report from St. Andrew's College and a ratification of their auditor's report. And then in the late afternoon, there's a introduction to proposed resolutions and bylaw amendments, followed by Vespers, and then there are breakout groups in the evening on various topics. These topics could be theological, they could be dealing with temporal issues, governance, stewardship, that sort of thing. And that varies from Sobor to Sobor. On the Friday morning, again, hierarchical divine liturgy, beginning at about 7 a.m., followed by breakfast, further discussion of bylaws and resolution amendments, resolutions from the floor. There are breakout sessions in the afternoon to discuss these. There are parish presentations then in the afternoon, Vespers, and typically on the Friday evening, you would have convocation from St. Andrew's College. I'm sure you're starting to appreciate how difficult doing those things virtually would be. So on Saturday morning, the other thing that generally happens on Thursday, there's an introduction to the candidates who would be standing for election for the next consistory board. The introduction, there's no speeches, there's no campaigning or anything like that. The candidates their names are simply presented. Typically, they would have biographies or short resumes, CVs, posted on a bulletin board somewhere or distributed where people can read them. So then what happens is there would also be for running for chancellor, anyone running for chancellor would of course address the assembly, the Sobor. Elections take place depending on how it's all structured. That you could have some elections, for example, the election of the chancellor could still take place on Friday, but typically Saturday morning you have another hierarchical divine liturgy, and all the reports from the breakout groups concerning the resolutions come in the morning, and the voting takes place. Then you have lunch, and then the elections take place. If there's any need for further resolutions voting, that takes place later on Saturday as well. The new consistory board meets late Saturday. There's Vespers, and that's all followed by a banquet. And then Sunday morning, there's typically a hierarchical liturgy at a cathedral, and if it's typically in Winnipeg, it would be at the Metropolitan's Cathedral, Holy Trinity, followed by brunch hosted at the cathedral, and then everybody goes home. So that's your typical Sobor. This year, and that's what it would have looked like last year if we had been able to do an in-person Sobor. We had gotten to the point last February where we had the hotel lined up. We had started working on the program. Information had gone out in a package in about mid-February regarding resolutions and so forth. And then, of course, the COVID hit, which presented us with a problem. At that point in time, I'm sure these various platforms like the one we're using tonight, for example, or Google Meets or GoToMeeting or Zoom were available in some form, but nobody really knew about them, and nobody really had perfected any deficiencies that these platforms had, because they were used fairly sparingly. Sometimes Skype was used for meetings and that sort of thing, but it was something that probably was relegated more to the younger crowd, the geeks of the world, if I could call them that. The computer nerds, so to speak. But once COVID hit and the shutdowns took place both across Canada and the United States and generally around the world, people had to start thinking of doing things different ways. And that included how you conduct your church services on Sunday mornings. The difficulty in Canada is that, of course, we've got 10 different provinces, and COVID was at different stages in different provinces. They had different rules and regulations for how people could or could not meet, how many could be in a group, how many could attend a function, that sort of thing. In Alberta, for example, I think they still can have, unless something's changed over the last couple of days, they could have some limited church services with attendance. In BC, they're shut down completely right now. There was talk at the end of March of having limited church services again in British Columbia for the Easter period with 10% capacity, and that got shut down within about 3 days because of the spike in the new variants of COVID. Last summer, we had some in-person church services. We had to provide the local health authorities with a reopening plan. The plan was 40 pages or something like that. We had diagrams of where people would walk in the church, where people would sit. We had rules for people attending, that sort of thing. So it was a cumbersome process, but by and large, we were all shut down and we had to find different ways of doing things. So for our church services, we decided to use the GoToMeeting platform, which is very much like Zoom. And we found two things. First of all, we found that our attendance at the virtual services was only marginally less than what it was, generally speaking, in-person services, which surprised a lot of people. But the other thing we found was that some people who normally would attend church twice a year, Easter and Christmas, were attending virtually every Sunday. So there's the upside to it. And some were attending from, we had attendees from California, we had attendees from Alberta, from everywhere. I mean, there's no barrier when you're in the virtual cyberspace world. As COVID kept things locked down, these various platforms were developed and nuanced, and our church board meetings were run using GoToMeeting. And it took us a while to get our consistory board meetings onto a Zoom platform, because the consistory board had always had the teleconference facility, but the teleconference facility is expensive. And once we got on the Zoom platform, you pay your license fee, and you're good for more than enough people than we needed for consistory board meetings. So we've been able to use the Zoom platform for that. All of which is to say that when we were looking at all these problems and issues in March of 2020, we came to the realization that we could not hold an in-person Sobor, that we had to postpone it. At that time, the talk was that the COVID was going to peak April, May, June, tail off through the summer, and hopefully by the fall, things would be somewhat relatively normal. So we put it over for a year, thinking that by this summer, by 2021, we would be able to hold an in-person Sobor, much along the lines that we had been thinking of, and the way I described it to you, the typical Sobor takes place. What happened, of course, was that in somewhere around June, July, there was a second wave of COVID, which stunned everybody, although I suppose the medical professionals were warning us of this in any event. Come September, October, November, there's this third wave of COVID. So as we worked our way through the summer, we decided that an in-person Sobor in 2021 was not in the cards. So the decision was made to go virtual. The question then became, how do you do that? Is it going to be 100% virtual, where every delegate has to have a device and attend through either a laptop, a desktop computer, an iPad, a tablet, an iPhone, or a smartphone? Or is it going to be somewhat hybrid, where people in major centers could get together, for example, at a church hall and share a big screen or something like that? So we had a number of discussions about those options. And obviously, as things unfolded in the pandemic, we started to realize that given the way the restrictions were being lifted and then reimposed, lifted and reimposed, we could not predict what the situation is going to be like in the summertime of 2021. Now, obviously, hoping for the best with vaccinations occurring, hopefully restrictions will be lifted to a large extent by the time we hit July. Certainly the Americans are talking about celebrating your typical 4th of July with larger groups of people and so forth. But none of that is for sure. And so the decision was made to go 100% virtual. We're still in the process of talking about what that's going to look like. So we wanted to identify what platform we were going to use for virtual Sobor. And in the course of our discussions, we made contact with the Alberta Libraries System. And they had held a conference in the early fall of 2020 using a software program where they had 1,200, that's 1,200 attendees. And they said that it ran successfully, and they offered their services to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada to run our Sobor, the technical end of it, obviously. The software program that they use runs and I'm not an expert in this, so if anybody has technical questions, I'm certainly the wrong person to be here talking about it. But as I understand it, somehow this software program is superimposed on a Zoom platform and will allow people to register, to get an identification number, which they will use to log in for Sobor. There is a secure voting system, which I don't know anything about yet, because we're still at the early stages of being, if I could use the word, trained by Alberta Libraries. So we have to set up a training schedule. And so things are going to be different in many ways. First of all, because it's a virtual Sobor, unlike an in-person Sobor, we're going to be dealing with 4 time zones. So it's the Eastern time zone, the Central, the Mountain, and Pacific. That alone presents a problem as to how you structure a day, right? Because 9 o'clock in the East is 6 a.m. Or 5 a.m. or whatever it is in Pacific time. And conversely, closing in the evening, 7 o'clock in the East is only 3 o'clock in Vancouver. So we can still go in Vancouver. We can still go another 3-4 hours, but I don't think the people in Ontario can go another 3-4 hours. So what that means is the time available for the actual working part of Sobor is truncated. It's reduced to hours that would be common across the 4 time zones, that are reasonable across the 4 time zones, which means a later start in the East and an earlier finish in the West, sort of thing. So the other thing that we've discovered as the Sobor Planning Committee has held 18 meetings so far, and we've been meeting virtually using the Zoom platform. what we've discovered, because a number of people on the Sobor Planning Committee during the course of our deliberations over time have had experience with various types of virtual conferences. Myself, I ran a legal workshop for the Law Society of British Columbia in November of 2020. It was a mock hearing workshop, and we used the Zoom platform. And so I learned a bunch of things about how Zoom operates, and others attended conferences. Dobrodika Sonia Udod, for example, attended a nursing conference that involved several hundred people that was run out of North Carolina or someplace in the US. And so she acquired some experience. We all were bringing this experience back to the table and sharing our experience so as to try to figure out how best to work our virtual Sobor. So as we've discovered, and as many of us learned through our own experience, doing a Zoom conference or using a virtual platform can be fatiguing. So you can't, it's not the sort of thing where you're in person in a hotel ballroom, and if you're getting tired, you get up to go to the back, you pour yourself a cup of coffee, you do a washroom break, you talk to some friends, you come back, you sit down, you can hear the people talking in the background over the microphones and that sort of thing. That's just not doable. I mean, you can leave the conference, you can mute your mic, you can mute your video and go get a cup of coffee or whatever you want to do at home. But by the same token, you're going to miss stuff, and you're really not talking to anybody else who's at the conference. So there's a whole series of issues that we're still trying to iron out in terms of the technical aspects of running a virtual conference. The conference, the Sobor, is still going to be 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Tentatively, that's how it's been scheduled. The Dobrodika and clergy conferences, because these are now virtual conferences, don't have to be back-to-back with Sobor anymore. So the thinking there is that they can be held the week before, as opposed to having them on the Wednesday just prior to Sobor. So they won't be part of the Alberta Libraries configuration, but the numbers that generally attend a clergy or the Dobrodika conference can easily be handled by the Zoom platform and easily moderated by individuals from our consistory who have already had quite a bit of experience with Zoom over the last 12 months. So you can expect to see a timetable that would show the Dobrodika and clergy conferences in the week prior to the week of Sobor. The other thing, of course, is the opening liturgy. We don't have a facility for holding a divine liturgy every morning before Sobor starts, before the sessions start, the way we would in an in-person Sobor, or Vespers. I suppose you could, in some fashion, build it in, but it gets very complicated. So the thinking there is that there would be a divine liturgy, a hierarchical divine liturgy that would be webcast or in sort of a webinar form on YouTube or using a Zoom platform. The decision there hasn't been made yet, but it would come out of either the Metropolitan's Cathedral in Winnipeg, or given that Metropolitan Udi's resignation takes effect July 10, which is 5 days before Sobor starts, and the locum tenens is going to be His Grace Bishop Hilarion. It will likely come out of St. John's Cathedral in Edmonton on the Sunday before at the beginning of the week of Sobor. So everybody would be, all the delegates and everybody would be urged to attend that via your computer virtually in cyberspace. So that's the one difference there. The other is that every day of Sobor would simply begin with a prayer, Tsaru Niebesny, and end with a prayer at the end of the day, Dostojne, or something like that. That's what Vladika Yuri has suggested, and it sounds like a good idea. The evenings, there are no evening sessions being planned. They're going to be open. There may be a way of people congregating using the platform on their own in the evenings for discussion purposes. That has yet to be logistically worked out. Generally speaking, the Sobor program will not have what I would call the more interesting aspects, such as theological discussions or breakout sessions or those sorts of things. It's going to be strictly business, and what we're trying to do is limited to the absolutely necessary business that has to get done. Now, currently, there are some 23 or 24 resolutions that have come in from various sources. There is no way that 23 or 24 resolutions can get handled in the times allotted, because the way the working day of Sobor is going to work is they're going to be 1.5 hour sessions, and then a half-hour break, another 1.5 hour session, a longer break for lunch, and then an 1.5 hour session. In total, the sessions are going to be 6 hours per day maximum, with those kinds of breaks. So the start times, tentatively 10 a.m., and this is Eastern start times. Our Central Time, Winnipeg time. 10 a.m. Winnipeg time will be the start time on the first day, and then 9:30 a.m. on the next 2 days. The end times will be 5:30 every day Winnipeg time. So do your calculations. That would be 6:30 in the East, 4:30 Mountain, and 3:30 Pacific time for the end. We will be beginning in Pacific times. We will be beginning, let's see, 1, 2 at 8 a.m. In the East, you'll be beginning at 11 a.m. So you can see the logistical problems just with that alone that it presents. Currently, we don't have a program formulated yet. The program committee is working on it, but sort of some of the tentative thinking is that there could possibly be an election of a metropolitan on the first day. Well, the morning would typically be with the opening, a prayer, greetings. The election of chairs and secretaries, which normally takes place on the opening morning, will not take place in a typical fashion, because people who are going to chair the Sobor or be the secretaries, both clergy and laity, have to be identified ahead of time in order to receive the proper training from Alberta libraries as to how the system works, so they can actually run the Sobor. So those people will be identified hopefully ahead of time, trained ahead of time, and Sobor will simply ratify them as the chairs and the secretaries. That'll be followed by the typical greetings, and then the thinking is there may be a metropolitan election on that day. We're not sure about that. That's all in the air. There's also the auditor's report. Craig and Ross will give a synopsis of the last 5 years, 6 years, I guess. There'll be a chancellor's report. All of the reports from the various committees will be filed in writing. Some will pre-record or video pre-record portions of their reports. There may be PowerPoints that will be displayed on the screens at the time, but typically they're all going to be in writing, simply and available to everyone well ahead of time, ahead of the Sobor itself. On day 2, the thinking is there may be a discussion of the resolutions, proposed bylaw amendments. There'll be at some point on day 2, and again, the times at this point are flexible because we're trying to work with the platform, the break times and so forth. those folks who are standing, the clergy who are standing for election for chancellor, will have an opportunity to address the Sobor and respond to questions, reports. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions regarding the reports from the various breakout sessions that'll be held. The platform that Alberta Libraries is providing, the software platform, has the facility to facilitate up to 50 breakout sessions. We're not going to need 50, but it's a fairly robust platform, so it has that facility. All the voting on the bylaws and resolutions and everything else, again, will take place on the morning of Saturday. And in the afternoon of Saturday, we're going to have the elections of the consistory board, the auditors, the ecclesiastical tribunal, and late Saturday will be the closing. So it's going to be very truncated. Part of the issue here that we're going to be dealing with in some measure is to somehow get the resolutions pared down to a reasonable number that can actually be handled in a virtual Sobor like this.
Vladimir, sorry if I just may interrupt you very quickly. I had mentioned a couple of times the word resolution, a number of them, and how and they will be voted on at the Sobor. And they'll also will be available before the Sobor for people to familiarize
Absolutely. The list of resolutions should be going out. Well, I don't think it's gone today, but it should be going out next week. Father Taras has the complete list. The list does not contain the text of the resolutions, because that would be, a package that's about that thick. So the list has a brief description of the resolution and the origin. Where does it come from? What parish, or whether it comes from the bylaws committee, what the origin is. The resolutions are grouped as ordinary resolutions, and they have an R number. So R1, R2, R3, R4, that sort of thing. And the other group is proposed bylaw amendments, and they have a B number, B1, B2, B3, B4, etc. So that list should be out next week. There's a package coming out of the consistory to most parishes electronically, to some parishes in hard copy, that contains, as I understand it, audited financials and some other information, and this list of resolutions will be included. Now, depending on how many resolutions we're actually going to be able to handle at this Sobor, the text of those resolutions that propose bylaw amendments will be in some fashion published to the faithful mid-May, towards the end of May, somewhere in that range. So that will be available. All the information will be available well ahead of time. All the reports have to be submitted in writing by June 15, so they'll be made available well ahead of time. The expectation is that delegates are going to come to this Sobor prepared. In other words, they're going to read the material. They're not going to show up the way they typically do for an in-person Sobor, where they come to the social, have a few drinks, and then start reading the material that night in the hotel room. If you do that, if you think you're going to leave it to the last minute, your participation in the Sobor is going to be pretty much hopeless. You've got to come prepared this time around, and you've got to come prepared in advance if you're going to make an informed contribution. And we will be doing everything in our power to make all the information available to everyone well in advance, to give you sufficient time to prepare. The other thing that's going to happen probably about 2 weeks before Sobor is there's going to be a dry run, a practice session. In other words, everybody by that time will have registered. The delegates will have registered. They will have their identification numbers. There's going to be rules around that. For example, you're going to have to use one of the thoughts that's being discussed is that you're going to have to use the name that you use when you that's on your membership for your local parish that gets sent to the consistory. If you use some other name, it won't be recognized. Okay, so you're going to have to use the proper name and use your identification number to log in. So we're going to have a dry run to make sure that everybody knows how to work the technology, how to log in properly, how to. There is a secure voting provision in the Alberta Library software, so everybody's going to be given a tutorial on how to use that. So we're going to walk everybody through the steps so that come Sobor first day, first morning, people will be able to log in. Now there are going to be technical advisors available. So if anybody has trouble even then logging in, there will be a feature where you can get a hold of someone that will help you log into the system to make sure you can participate. So these are the kinds of things we're thinking about. I don't know what else I could tell you at this point. As I say, it's a work in progress. It's a difficult one. We are discussing a possible, and of course, His Eminence Metropolitan Yudi is involved in these discussions as well, of having a possible 2022 special Sobor to deal with things that can't be dealt with at this Sobor because of the constraints of using a virtual platform to run the Sobor. So that's also being discussed. Hopefully all those things get resolved. We have a consistory board spring meeting coming up in early May. In the meantime, the consistory board is meeting quite regularly to deal with Sobor issues. The Sobor Planning Committee meets every 2 weeks. The various other committees, like the Resolutions and Bylaws Committee, we meet when necessary. But we are beginning to work on the Pravilnik, which are the rules of how you handle yourself at Sobor in terms of procedures for voting on resolutions, making amendments, that sort of thing. Obviously, the Pravilnik from 2015 and 2010 we've looked at, but it needs adjustments because of the fact that this Sobor is going to be held in cyberspace as a virtual Sobor. So there you have it. I don't know what else I can tell you at this juncture.
I actually wanted to ask you, when we talk about the resolutions, the deadline for making the resolutions had been passed, right?
Yeah, the deadline for making resolutions to amend the bylaws is a hard deadline because it's prescribed by the bylaws. So that was March 12th. That one's gone. But ordinary resolutions can be made from the floor. So even though we had a deadline to encourage people to get them in early, it's a soft deadline. We're not going to reject resolutions that come in late because they can obviously come in from the floor at the time the Sobor is underway. So it's far better for us not to reject something that's late than in the way of an ordinary resolution, to put it into the package so that everybody can see it and address it ahead of time, as opposed to saying, no, you can't submit it now, but submit it from the floor when the resolution, when the Sobor is actually underway. That doesn't make any sense. So we've obviously taken that into account.
That's very good. And then for the running of the Sobor, when you think about the process, you mentioned about divine liturgy, hierarchical divine liturgy in the program. It normally is done actually that it goes from east to west. On Thursday is done by Eastern Eparchy, Friday is done by Central Eparchy, Saturday is done by Western Eparchy. Is there like but this year, again, as you had mentioned,
there won't be any. There'll be a divine liturgy on the Sunday at the beginning of the week of Sobor that'll probably be out of St. John's in Edmonton. I don't know where the closing divine liturgy will be broadcast. I say broadcast, but webcast from. I don't think that decision has yet been made. But no, there will not be a divine hierarchical liturgy every morning. There will simply be an opening prayer. The realities of cyberspace.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then as will be at Sobor, how would that the voting actually, if you can just explain it to or mention how are delegates elected, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to be, if it's going to be from the parishes, that we're going to be sitting in the parish hall and just group of us from our order, let's say, will be making decisions and resolutions, or and then voting processes, or is it going to be if you can just elaborate a little bit on the
Sure.
logistics, because
Okay, so the logistics of that, as I say, we talked about various options there, and the logistics of how that happens or can happen in July, because you mentioned getting a group getting together at the parish or something like that, is totally dependent on what the restrictions, the provincial health restrictions are at that time. Okay, so we can't predict what they are. We can't predict how the virus is going to behave between now and July. So what we're planning is as I said, a 100% virtual Sobor where every delegate has to have their own device. In other words, a laptop or an iPad or a tablet, some sort of device where they have both video and audio capabilities to be able to log in and participate. Now, whether a group of delegates can get together in the hall, they will still have to have their own devices because that's the only way the software program is going to recognize them. Okay. Now we're not encouraging you to get together in the hall or plan on doing that because we don't know, as I say, what the restrictions will be come July. We're not nearly as far ahead in vaccinations as the Americans are. So the Americans are very optimistic about what their July may look like. I don't think our July is going to look anything like theirs because the talk in Canada is that everybody won't be vaccinated until the first shot until September. And then, a large portion of the population probably have their second shots by then as well. But we don't know. We just don't know what it's going to look like. So we're running this on the basis that everybody's going to be at home on their own device by themselves. That's our vision of a virtual Sobor. Now, what people do locally, depending on their local circumstances, is up to them. Just bearing in mind that everyone's going to have their own device, and these rules will be coming out in due course from the planning committee. So you're going to have all that in writing. It's a work in progress still. If something should change drastically, which would allow groups of people together, we may rethink that. Typically at a Sobor, you also have guests register to come and attend, and they don't vote or participate, but they can pay a reduced registration fee and sit at the back and watch the proceedings. Well, there's no particular way that we could police guests because obviously I'm sitting here on the computer. You see me, you don't see what's behind me. There could be 10 people sitting on the floor behind me watching the proceedings and listening like pseudo guests, and we have no way of controlling that. So the decision's been made that we're not going to have any official guest category. But we are anticipating that people are probably going to have others listening over their shoulder or watching over their shoulder from time to time, and there's nothing we can do about that. So those are the realities. Okay.
Okay. Just very quickly about election of delegates from the parishes.
Okay. So it's one delegate for every 25 members. And if you're above, 25, 50, 75, if you're a fraction above, you have to get an additional delegate, you have to have at least the majority of the next 25, so 13. So if you have 25 parish members, you get 1 delegate. If you have 50, you get 2 delegates. If you have 37, you get 1. If you have 38, you get 2. Okay, so that's the break. That's how that works. All clergy, of course, can attend. The members of the consistory board can attend. Members of standing committees can attend. The list is in the bylaws. It's set out in section 4 of the bylaws, which are available on the website. So you can look at the list, and that'll tell you exactly who can attend.
Okay. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, Volodymyr, is for the church. You had mentioned a couple of times it's very important Sobor for us to attend and be very cognizant of what's happening and be very educated about our proceedings and policies and stuff like that. What would you recommend as a course of action for the parish to be truly prepared to work for the benefit of the church for the Sobor?
Well, let me see. I've been doing a lot of reading personally over the last little while. The one thing you should be familiar with is all the documents that are on the website currently, and I'm not talking about the part of the website that deals with Sobor. If you go to the UOCC website, the About category, documents and forms, the charter, the Act of Incorporation, not very long, it's only about 18 sections. There's parts of that you need to be familiar with. The Articles of Agreement, and in particular, read the commentary by Father Ihor Kutash. His commentary is right on the money, and the bylaws. Other documents you might want to consider, I don't know whether you have them available to you, but in 2008, when we were electing Bishops Hilarion and Andri in Saskatoon, we had a voting process that was outlined in VSNIC in the June edition of the 2008 VSNIC. We didn't follow that voting process in 2010 when we elected Metropolitan Yuri, but it is a voting process that, in my view, is the proper one to follow. It, as you may remember, I don't know whether you were there or not. Yeah. So you remember that we all went to the cathedral. The doors were locked. There was a malebing. We were sequestered. The choir was singing. There was a special ballot box. We all marked our ballots. We deposited them. The ballots were counted. The announcement was made, and then we were allowed to return to the main hall. You know, it was a very urochisti type process, a solemn process, befitting a solemn occasion of electing bishops of the church. In 2010, when we elected Metropolitan Yuri, the only thing that was presented by the consistory board was a motion to elect, and we just voted on the motion, which in my view, I think I objected at the time, in my view, was not the way we should have done things. So that's, I think, the voting process document you might want to get familiar with, because if there is an election of the Metropolit at this Sobor, I'm not sure what voting process they propose to use. No one said anything at this point, but as a member of the consistory board, I'm certainly advocating for using the same one that we used in 2008. But the problem is, of course, that you can't do that in the virtual world, because we can't go to a cathedral and, you know, hold a malebing and be sequestered and all the rest of it. So I don't know what's going to happen with the voting process itself if that takes place. The other document you should probably get familiar with was published in 2010, and it's actually I think you had Father Gladio give you a synopsis of the process of electing the Metropolitan. He didn't have this document with him, but it was published in the June VSNIC of 2010 that outlined 8 steps in the selection process of a Metropolitan. And the consistory board had met at its spring meeting that year. For half a day, they considered our bylaws, the Articles of Agreement, the norms and practices of Sobor, as well as the norms and practices of the Holy Synod in Constantinople, and came up with this 8-step process by consensus, and then published it in Visnik and distributed it to the delegates at Sobor in 2010 before the Metropolite was elected. So it quite accurately tracks the bylaws and the Articles of Agreement and that sort of thing. Now, if you don't have it, if you don't have access to these documents, I can tell you that I got them using a program called Wayback. It's a program that you can Google online. And when you get into the program itself, it opens a little dialog box, and you type in www.uocc.ca, and it gives you a time frame, bar graph time frame from 1996 till 2021, and you can go to any year where there's a bar, click on it, and it'll give you a snapshot of what the UOCC website looked like at that year, at that moment in time. It's just a snapshot. But any documents that were on the website at that time become accessible. That's how I got these back copies of Visnik. I used this program and I found them. But I actually copied out the relevant pages. I can forward them to you if you like, and you can distribute them to members of your parish.
Well, I can just post them on a Facebook or
you can post
website,
them, sure,
and
that's even
and
easier.
people would have an access to it.
Yeah. Now, what I've done in our bylaws committee has to deal with this. I've distributed the information to the bylaws committee. I took the voting process in 2008, and I took the selection process from 2010, and I've combined them into a protocol for selecting a metropolitan. I've adjusted the language a little bit to make it more prescriptive as opposed to descriptive. In substance, it's identical, and we're going to propose that it be added to the policy manuals of the UOCC. There was actually a resolution at the Sobor in 2015 that it be added to the bylaws as an appendix. It was my bad. I missed that resolution in going through the various documents, so we missed the deadline, the March 12 deadline. But a policy is as good as anything else in the meantime. And we can always add it to the bylaws the following year if we have a special Sobor. So you have that. I'll send that material to you, and you can have a look at it. I've sent it to Father Gladio, by the way, after I read his presentation, and he was, I think he mentioned in his presentation that there was a voting process that was developed in 2008, but he couldn't find it on the website. I sent that to him. That's the one I'm talking about. And he mentioned that wasn't followed in 2010, and he's right about that. But I sent him the 2010 document as well. So he's got those now also.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Vladimir, I just wanted to, for those who are watching us or will be watching this broadcast, just wanted to say that, the point or the goal of those presentations of us getting together and talking about this is for people to be informed and make informed decision. I know that at the Sobor we're saying it's a Святий Дух, побажає чи повеліє за повеління Святого Духа. But we also have to contribute our part in being knowledgeable and good stewards of our church. It's not that someone has to decide for us. We have to decide. We have to present a decision and for blessing of the bishops, so that we actively everybody participates in that church building process.
I agree with that comment, and it's interesting that you say that, because when you read the 2010 process for selecting a metropolitan, there's an introductory paragraph that talks about how the consistory board got together and spent time looking over the documents to discern the process. And when you use the word discern, and you can look this up online if you want, but the word discern, when it's used in a religious context, means discovering the will of God with the assistance of the Holy Spirit. So clearly what the consistory board was saying is, look, we got together, we used the gifts that God gave us, used our best intelligence in going through all these documents to put together what we believe is the proper process, taking into account all of these factors for selecting our metropolitan. So, when you say, yes, we're guided by the Holy Spirit, but there's a reason God gave us brains. It's for us to use them in terms of in a way that we're guided to use. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I just have this book on my shelf somewhere. I don't know if I can retrieve it very quickly, but it's I meant to bring it back, but sorry, my library back there is not as accessible as a computer, and we'll bring it back in one of the conversations next week, but it's called Towards Oriented Leadership, and how it talks about Trinitarian model of governance in the church, and how it talks about importance every layer of faithful in the church. We are all royal priesthood by baptism, and we all need to participate in building of the church. Otherwise, it will be something imposed upon us, So we do acknowledge the fact that the bishops are the leaders, they're the main stewards of the church. But stewardship is the role is something that everyone has to play a role in.
Yeah. Again, it's interesting what you say, because it's true. The bishops, the metropolitan, the patriarch are indeed the leaders of our church, and in terms of theology and dogma and everything else, it's a pyramid like this with the faithful at the bottom. But in our church, with our Sobor Pramis, when it comes to governing temporal issues, that is, issues that are not theological or have anything to do with dogma or holy tradition or that sort of thing, Sobor is the highest authority. And so it's an upside down pyramid with the chancellor as the general manager of the consistory office at the bottom. Okay. And so that actually, there was, I don't know whether you attended the symposium in Toronto in 2014 that was held on the University of Toronto grounds, organized by Yars Lazochuk and some others, but we had people from the KP, the Kievan Patriarchate, as it then was, from the Autocephalous Church, from the Russian, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Russian, the Moscow Patriarchate, and of course from our church, all attending, presenting papers, and there were professors there and everything else. And there was a representative of His All Holiness there, Father John, and I, for the life of me, cannot pronounce his last name. It's to me, it's unpronounceable. Sorry,
I wasn't there.
Well, in any event, the question was put to him. He said, the question was asked, given our Sobor Pramis, where the faithful, including the laity, have such a voice in managing the affairs of the church, is that non-canonical? And he said, no, it is completely acceptable. It is sometimes good to turn the pyramid upside down, and the church in Cyprus has a similar model. So, for anybody that comes along and says you guys are, you got your Sobor Pramis and somehow you're outliers or you're outside the fold, that just is not the case. So, just bear that in mind.
I just wanted to say that at some point of time I'll defend my thesis, but my thesis, like I did it many variations of that. I started was the reforms of Petro Mohela in 17th century, and how they are criticized or critiqued, especially by the Moscow Patriarchate, for being, again, non-canonical, for being Protestants and stuff like that. And last night we had a very wonderful conversation about part of it, about Passia services that we have in our church, and that Passia service is a novelty that Metropolitan Petro Mohela had introduced Father Ihor Kutar had explained it quite well, that this is not a novelty. Pasia service is abstracts of the Petro Mohila was a missionary, if you were to say it, because he saw the need for education in the church. What did he do? He put together the best abstracts, describe Christ's suffering for us, for our salvation, from a Passion Week, right? And to have something that was opposite to the 12 Stations of the Cross that was very popular, and brought by the Western Church. He put together this Pasia service. And that Pasia service, and I had said it many times and I will say it again, is a wonderful thing. We love serving it here in Ottawa. And what we do in Ottawa is actually invite other Orthodox churches on one of the Sundays of the Lent. Last year and this year we didn't do it, but we invite other Orthodox churches, and we serve that service, and we have like 12, 14 different priests, and coming from different churches. And what is happening is that there's a huge attendance of people. We had 140, 150 people coming from different churches in Ottawa. We have, of course, a luncheon nicely, and then a presentation. But two aspects of it. It's a very beautiful service that is totally comprised of the service of the Passion Week. And number two is, of course, it's very, it has a dopoved and propoved, and people loved it. And you were saying that about canonical, non-canonical, unique history of our church, even if you were to say it. So that's why when I'm talking about, sorry, I started with Petro Mohila, wanted to finish it. Petro Mohila did whatever he needed to do to preserve and maintain his church within his understanding, his knowledge and stuff. He did not do anything uncanonical or non-dogmatical, because word canonical is even kind of a word like everybody turns his own way and interprets his own way, but non-dogmatic probably would be perfect. The second thing that I was writing in my thesis is, of course, the unique history of Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada. And
yes.
when I studied that, it was an amazing thing that so many factors were playing against our church, and from 1891 till 1918, it's almost like 27 years passed since the church had came into being, and how first priests, that were ordained by our church, by first our three priests, how much work they had to do, how much work laity did it. So I do believe that the Holy Spirit does act in our church, did lead our people to create this church, and the last thing that I wanted to mention is that we had 3 years ago, Father Petro Samets's grandson was an MC at our church parish banquet, feast day. And he talked about hardship that was at first for the people that wanted to have a church. He's talked about how one of the episodes was that that's Petro Samets was walking to was actually going to different settlements, immigrant settlements. And what happened is that one time he led because it was hard for horses, so he got off the sani, and he was walking behind it, and he quickly realized that he needed to catch up, otherwise he would be lost because horses would go first, so he walked in front of the horses to be kind of just to different places, and there were huge differences. So having said that, I just wanted to say that we as a church has a very difficult but very much a humbling history. Yes, we have our own troubles and problems. I agree with this. But it is also that we have to recognize that that we have also a wonderful traditions, and we should not be embarrassed or ashamed of those traditions. We just should build upon them. So that's my spiel. Sorry, and I see that Gloria wrote, "Read my father's book." My father, the priest. Yes, it was Vasil Samets who wrote this book. And Otes Victor Lacusta says the Greek priest was Father John.
That's it. That's the one.
Victor. Otes Victor is like a library for us,
Yeah. That's the one. Yeah. And oddly enough, too, when I mentioned the pyramids, I don't know whether you're a movie buff at all, but if you've watched any of those Dan Brown movies with Tom Hanks, you know,
Yes.
the angels and demons and Da Vinci Code and all that, and he's into symbolism. If you superimpose the two triangles, you get the Star of David, right?
Yeah. I actually did not see the movies. I read the books, so
Yeah.
because
Well,
it was very interesting because it's and again it's one of the examples, like why why they could not be taken as something serious,
well,
and
the books aren't serious, but I mean the whole idea of symbolism.
yes,
You know, the
absolutely,
symbolism of the Star of David. Where does Jesus come from? Bethlehem, the city of David. You know, so
absolutely,
if you're into
absolutely.
that sort of thing, it helps.
Yes, of course, yes, yeah. That's how it is. I found the book, so as we were talking, I just wanted to show it. It's called Towards Oriented Leadership
Yes.
and Why Every Christian Needs It. And it's a wonderful book, actually. Father Haladia had recommended it to me quite a while ago, and I bought it and made a couple marks. And it talks about correlationship between conciliarity and hierarchy. And if you don't mind me, I'll just read it very quickly. I quoted it once before. He says, the author is saying that our leadership responsibility is to implement and incarnate the Trinitarian ways of being in each and every leadership situation. Okay, and then he says the following: the first important aspect of the Trinitarian way of being that we must grasp is the phrase unique yet inseparable. This paradox describes the dynamic at work within the Holy Trinity. Dynamic at work of the Holy Trinity is unique yet inseparable. We might describe it as a dynamic tension, a tension with two components: hierarchy, as in Holy Trinity, and conciliarity, working together. These aspects of Trinitarian relationship reveal to our second Trinitarian way of being hierarchical conciliarity. So I think that when we talk about Orthodox Church, we talk about hierarchical conciliarity. The tongue is twisting, when you read all of those terminology, but it's true, So it's a very unique way of describing how we ought to exist in our church. Ієрархічна соборність. So, okay. Yeah, I think that I promised to do it for an hour, and now we have an hour and almost 15 minutes. So it will be, unless there is a questions, please let us ask questions. Please ask us questions if you have any. If not, we'll finish it up. I also wanted to thank Volodymyr once again for doing this presentation, taking an hour and 15 minutes out of his busy schedule, and especially congratulate Volodymyr with beautiful addition to his family. He has twins, right?
Twins, yes. So 3 grandchildren altogether. The twins are a boy and a girl.
Oh my goodness.
So I have Maya, who's 2. She's probably waiting for Gita to come up and read her stories before she goes to bed.
Okay.
And then there's Leah and Okan, Turkish names. So it's Okan Boris Pilipchuk and Leah Nadia Pilipchuk, and it's Maya Margareta Pilipchuk.
Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations. This is a wonderful
thank you.
to your family. May God give you strength and health and all of the blessings. Ми скінчимо нашу розмову знову ж таки молитвою і тоді попрощаємося. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Богородице Діво, радуйся, благодатна Марія, Господь з тобою, благословена ти в жонах і благословений плід утроби твоєї, бо ти породила Христа, Спаса душ наших. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Всім добраніч. Володимире, ще раз вам дякую за все. І будемо тепер прощатися.
Прошу дуже.